Welcome to Movies We Love Recapped. Today we harken back to 1995 for the historical drama titled Braveheart. Please support the channel by liking and subscribing. Thanks. Here we go. As the movie begins, the year is 1280 AD, and we watch a group of Scottish nobles riding on horseback. They are on their way to meet with the English, who are offering a truce under the English king Edward Longshanks. They are unarmed for the peace talks. Here we meet William Wallace as a young boy. He and his father and older brother soon discover the treachery of the English, as all the Scots in attendance are mercilessly hanged. The surviving Scots plan their revenge. The next morning, William awakens expecting his family's return, but instead learns of their death by the English. He attends their funeral, but he's clearly in shock. An orphan now, his uncle, named Argyle, arrives and takes him away. He is sent to Europe to be educated. Next we see King Edward's son being married to the daughter of the King of France, but his eye is somewhere else. The scene changes, and the king discusses with his nobles how to deal with Scotland. He gets a brilliant idea. He will grant all English nobles in Scotland the right of first night, which means the noble will share the married woman's bed on her first night of marriage. The scene changes, and we meet William Wallace, all grown up. He has returned to Scotland. He arrives at a wedding celebration and takes part in some Highland sporting games of stone tossing, and enjoys meeting old friends. However, the local English lord arrives to enjoy his first night right with the new bride. The groom is not happy. Next we see William call upon his childhood sweetheart, Murren. They ride off together. They are obviously deeply in love. He soon proposes to her. To avoid the dishonor of first night, they get married in secret. They meet and are married under the night sky. It's just the two of them and a monk that performs the sacred ritual. The next day at the market, some English soldiers attempt to have their way with Murren. Luckily, William arrives and rescues her, but more soldiers arrive, and Murren tries to escape on horseback, but she is knocked off and captured. The local lord then ties her to a wooden stake and mercilessly executes her. William then rides to the English fortress in a show of surrender. He holds his hands up to show he comes in peace. But it's a ruse. He pulls his weapon and attacks the soldiers quickly, dispatching several. Then the other Scots that were in hiding launch an all-out assault. The nobleman is finally led to the wooden stake and dispatched in the same way. Wallace fulfills his revenge. Next we see an English garrison inside a wooden fortress. The soldiers spy an approaching patrol. The gates are opened to receive their comrades. However, they are not English, but Scotsmen in disguise. They dispatch the nobleman, but spare the other soldiers. Wallace tells them to go back to England and tell them that Scotland is now free. They burn the garrison. When the king gets word, he's not happy. He strikes down his useless son and tells the prince that it is now his job to deal with the Scots. Next we see the English taking their revenge as they burn and murder Scottish towns. However, the Scots continue to bravely fight the English. Next we meet Robert the Bruce, the most powerful Scottish lord in all of Scotland, meeting with his elderly father, who convinces him that the best way to survive is to pretend to support the rebellion, but to side with England in the end. The Scots get word that the English are amassing a huge army to come north, including hundreds of mounted knights, but thousands of Scottish warriors are also coming to join the resistance, and they now also have an army. But when the Scots see the strength and numbers of the English army, many become afraid and decide to flee and return home. But William Wallace arrives wearing blue war paint and rallies the troops to stand their ground. He reminds them that they are fighting for freedom. He says they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. When the English come to offer them terms of surrender, Wallace mocks them. The English begin with an archer attack. Many Scots are hit by arrows, but they continue to taunt the English. Wallace has a plan. The Scots will pretend to retreat. Luckily, the English fall for it. They ride with their horses full into battle to crush the retreating men. But the Scots are ready, and at the last second they lift their long spears, dismounting the riders. The knights are cut down by the hundreds. Next, the English send in the infantry soldiers for the attack. The Scots in turn charge at the English. Both sides run howling at each other. When they meet, the battle is fierce and ferocious, with both sides chopping and cutting their enemy. By the end of the carnage, the Scots stand victorious. Wallace screams in triumph. Next, we see the Scottish nobles bestow knighthood upon Wallace. After the battle, Wallace speaks to Robert the Bruce and tries to inspire him to take up the cause and lead the Scots to freedom. Robert is obviously conflicted by his desires for freedom and his father's advice to remain safe and support the English. Next, we see the Siege of York in northern England. The Scottish army is invading. The Scots use a battering ram against the city gates. The English pour hot oil on them and light them on fire. But they finally breach the gates. When the king receives word of the fall of York, he is so angry he tosses the prince's lover out of the window. His son draws a stiletto blade, but the king easily disarms him. The king decides to send Princess Isabella to bargain a truce with Wallace. He is offered gold and titles and land holdings if he halts his advance on England. When Wallace meets the princess, there is obvious chemistry between the two of them. He refuses the king's offer. As it turns out, it was all a ruse, as Longshanks is planning a massive attack on the Scots. Luckily, the princess sends word to Wallace warning him of the impending attack. The Scots ready their forces, and the two sides meet on the field. The English begin the attack by sending in the infantry and the cavalry. The Scots run to meet their foe. At the last second, the two groups stop and join together. It's the Irish, and they join with the Scots. Next, Scottish launch flaming arrows and catch the English in a burning trap. The ground has been soaked in flammable oil. Next, the true battle begins as the two forces clash. At the appropriate moment, Wallace calls in the two nobles, Mornay and Lachlan, but they have been bought off by Longshanks, and they betray Wallace. At that moment, archers release their arrows and both sides are cut down in a hail of arrows. Wallace is hit with an arrow and spies the king leaving the field. He follows after, but is stopped by a knight who turns out to be Robert the Bruce. To make up for his betrayal, he helps Wallace escape. The king decides to send Princess Isabel again to entrap Wallace, but instead they fall in love and begin a physical relationship. The nobles finally decide to back Wallace and call him to a meeting in Edinburgh. At his arrival, it is actually a trap, and Robert the Bruce, who was unaware, tries to help Wallace. But it's for naught. Wallace is arrested and sentenced to death and torture. The princess begs Longshanks for mercy for Wallace, but even in his weakened and dying state, he cannot find mercy in his heart. She then whispers in the king's ear that she carries Wallace's child in her belly. Wallace is then led to the executioner's block. He is pelted with rotting fruit. He is tortured. In the crowd, he sees his love, Muireann, and finally beheaded. In the final scene of the film, in the year 1314, Robert, now Scotland's king, faces the English at Bannockburn and implores his men to fight with him, as they did with Wallace. Robert then leads the Scots to a final victory and freedom. The film ends here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, please hit the like and subscribe button, and I will see you next time.